happy Sunday morning. This is the Filipino edition on RED FM 93.1 and 89.1 with your host, Joseph Lopez. Stay with us as we bring you Pinoy talk, music, and news. This is your program, your voice, your views. The Filipino edition.
Musmus pa ang isip, saksi ng langit sa sigla ng aking daigdig. Kaibigan ko'y araw, hatid ay liwanag sa bawat nais marating. Ano nga bang taglay ng hangin, habagat ang hiwaga ng isang pangarap? Sa lakas ng ihip, ako ay napadpad, narating ang bughaw na ulap. Tinig ko'y lilipad, ang samyo ng hangin ay yakap at walang hahadlang sa hangad ng puso. Tinig ko'y lilipad. Ang alon ng tubig na siyang aking himig, unti-unting naririnig. Habang mga talay sadyang gumuguhit, mga titik ng aking awit. Karamay ko ang buong kalawakan na umukit sa tamang daan. Buong kapanghandang ako ay gabayan, abutin man ng kailanman. Tinig ko'y lilipad, ang samyo ng hangin ay yakap at walang hahadlang sa hangad ng puso. Tinig ko'y lilipad, maghihintay, di mapapagod sa paglalakbay, makakamit ang tagumpay.
Tinig ko'y lilipad, ang samyo ng hangin ay yakap at walang hahadlang sa hangad ng puso.
Tinig ko'y lilipad,
Ang samyo
ng hangin at walang hahadlang. Tinig ko'y lilipad, ang samyo ng hangin ay yakap at walang hahadlang. Tinig ko'y lilipad sa hangad ng puso. Tinig ko'y lilipad.
Welcome to the Filipino edition. I'm your host, Joseph Lopez. What does history tell us in electing political leaders? Historian Arius Raposas shares his reflections when we return.
Looking to upgrade your current ride? Don't want the hassle of wait lists? I'm Jeevan Bath, General Manager at Suki Bath Auto Group. Our family has been in the auto industry for over 44 years, making every customer feel like they're part of the family. Enjoy affordable bi-weekly payments on all our models. Family owned and operated with over 300 vehicles in stock. Visit SukiBathAutoGroup.com today. That's SUKHI BathAutoGroup.com. Putting you first keeps us ahead.
Welcome to the Philippine edition. I'm your host, Joseph Lopez. History is very important because if we don't look at the past, we won't have some guidance as to what to expect in the future. And we sure need to know what happened in order to learn our lessons, in order to learn the challenges and opportunities if they present itself again on how to respond. And we have a Philippine historian with us, Arius Raposas. Arius Raposas is not only a historian but a writer, and he has a popular blog called The Philippine Historian, which is history-ph.blogspot.com. Arius Raposas is a graduate of the University of the Philippines in Diliman with a Master's of Public Administration and a Bachelor's degree of Arts in History. Currently, Arius is working for the Philippine government. Welcome to the Filipino edition, Arius.
Thank you for having me. And I would like to also take this opportunity to greet our listeners.
Yes. Arius, we would like to find out what made you very interested in history.
My interest in history began when I was young. As a student, I saw how interesting history is. Even though for many in my generation, they do not see it as interesting as other topics. But as for me, if we do not learn from the past, we are doomed to see parallelisms that we may fall along the way.
If we do not learn from the past, we may see parallelisms. Are you saying history can repeat itself?
History does not exactly repeat itself, but there are patterns that we may see along the way.
Can you give us some patterns or similarities or parallelism that you have observed when it comes to Philippine history?
For instance, we can look at how the Philippines is hailed as the first constitutional democracy in Asia, and how we choose our leaders then, and then how we also choose our leaders now. For instance, people can see how we tend to have these leanings for our leaders, what we want for our leaders in the past, and also in the present, and perhaps in the future.
What do we want in the past, and what do we want in the present? In our leaders, what are we looking for?
Yes. For instance, we have the theory of Remigio Agpalo, on the Pangulo regime. So he hypothesizes that the Pangulo regime roots from our pre-colonial past, when we are looking for strong and stable leaders. So he used his time, his contemporary time. It was in the 80s, in the 90s. And then he compared it with our colonial and with our pre-colonial leadership, how we chose our leaders. Because in the past, although we are taught in textbooks that we are fragmented between, say, datus or rahas, there are times when, in times of crisis or in times of need, they coalesce their energies into one confederation or one federation led by what we call a Pangulo. So that's where we also get our Tagalog term for president. No, presidente is, we borrowed from the Spanish, but we have the term Pangulo, which means head.
So that's an old,
yes,
colonial term, Pangulo.
Yes, that predates our colonial history, actually.
I see. Now, but isn't that the case anyway? People all over the world are always looking for strong men. Trump was elected because he had a strong man image. Okay, many leaders in the world, started, on a democratic field, and eventually, because they present themselves as patriotic, nationalistic, and they promise the moon, and they come across as, this leader who can command. Isn't that the case? As Trump was quoted to have said that it is better that people are afraid of you than people like you to be a good leader. Would you agree?
Perhaps there may be cultures other than the Philippines, but for America, for example, they have a different constitutional setup when it compared to the Philippines. We may compare that we took much of our laws, much of our constitutional matrices from America. But also, when we look at, for example, our Malolos Constitution, or with our Biak na Bato Constitution, which predates our American legacy when it comes to constitutional law, we can see that we have a preference, for instance, for a strong executive, whereas in the American model, you have a strong legislative. For example, if we compare what we have now, and of course, we can see that, for instance, the American Charter is quite rigid. It prefers to be amended instead of being made anew. Whereas the Philippines, for example, we had, since Malolos, we had a number of constitutions. We had the 1935 Constitution. We had the 1971 and 1987 constitutions. So every time there is a major regime change, there are also changes in the charter that we cannot deem flexible. No, so that's also why we can see that every time we may see ourselves as a unitary state in a way, because we have a preference for a strong executive. But on the other hand, if we say, for example, that if we compare, just for comparison, the share of the local and the national when it comes to revenue mobilization, for instance, we can say that the Philippines may be more decentralized than America, for instance, because if on average we have the state governments in America retain around 20% of their income generated, whereas in the Philippines, if we consult our local government code, we give our local governments 40%. So there are hypotheses among public administrators in the Philippines that perhaps we may be unitary in name, but federal in practice.
Can you explain that? What do you mean by unitary versus federal?
Because as you know, in recent years, we have this movement that would like to federalize the Philippines, right?
When you say federalize, can you explain that?
Federalize, I mean, that means decentralization and devolution of functions.
Right.
From the national government.
Like the U.S. with their national government,
yes,
and the states with their own, yes, government. All right.
Yes. But
and unitary means it's very centralized.
Yes, we are that means centralized government.
The top government. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Now, the provinces in the Philippines really do not have much to say when it comes to law. okay, or any other, aspects, and more of the designation and planning is at the behest of the national government. Am I getting you?
Yes.
All right. So,
So what?
so go ahead. You were comparing the Philippines and the U.S., and you said we are more decentralized. Okay, so in effect, we are federalized. In what sense?
We are. I am talking about our fiscal setup, but not in our, for instance, with our legal setup, because unlike the U.S., where if you transfer to another state, there are different laws enforced. In the Philippines, you get transferred to another province and then say that doesn't apply to me anymore.
Are you saying the Philippines, you go to another province and the law doesn't apply to you, or it's the same across the board?
It's the same across the board.
In the Philippines, yes.
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 So that's the difference also when it comes to our constitution and America's constitution and legal principles. But also, our leaders today that propose federalism in the Philippines would like to go back to our leaders back in the revolution, for instance. They would use as poster boys, say, Jose Rizal, who once wrote in his Philippines a Century Hence that the Philippines may be a federal nation when it chooses to pursue independence, but the operative word there is maybe. So he is supposing that that is one of the options that the Philippines may take moving forward, reckoning from his time, of course.
So has this unitary model, which has been what we have up to now, been working for us? You touch on the fiscal aspect. What about the other aspects?
Perhaps we can say that so far as the Philippines is concerned, it is working for us now because we still haven't radically changed it, so to speak.
Now you mentioned that unlike the United States, where they prefer amendments to their constitution, in our case, anytime there's a major regime change, we adapt a new constitution, and we had 3 so far, right? What years are those? 1930.
1935, and then we had the 1971 Constitution,
71.
and then the 1987, which is still in effect today.
How different is the current Constitution 1987 from 1935? What are the major differences?
Perhaps one of the major differences there is the provision on martial law, because we have placed a limit on how long martial law can be enforced, and it has to go through Congress.
What was it in 1935 versus 1987?
Because in 1935 there was no explicit limit on how long it can be enforced, whereas in the 1987 Philippine Constitution, we have it placed at a maximum of 60 days, subject to, of course, the approval of Congress.
That's why President Marcos was able to extend his martial law regime. Well, but he did try to work it during his term by having a new constitution in 1971. In what way did the 1971 differ from the 1935, and did it favor most likely the Marcoses?
One of the hailed characteristic of the 1971 Constitution is that it was made by Filipinos when the Philippines was already independent. We have to note that in the 1935 Constitution, it was made under the aegis of America, and we had the Philippine Commonwealth in mind. So that is also, perhaps that is one major difference when it comes to looking at the two constitutions. Of course, there might be conjectures that the president at the time, President Marcos, may have been senior, may have benefited. But when it comes to, when we study how the 1971 Constitution was made, there was even a ban Marcos resolution back then. So we can, although eventually it did not prosper, but we can see that when it comes to making our own charter, that is one major characteristic that we can say it differs from the 1935 Constitution. Although
what is it?
Although the 1935 Charter was also crafted by luminaries, but including, say, Claro M. Recto, who is known for his nationalistic fervor. But of course, it was done, of course, with America in mind.
With America in mind, but what is it? What's the difference? What are the major differences law-wise, principles-wise, with the 1971 versus 1935? What change, Major?
What are you looking for exactly?
Any major change, You said there's no implicit, there's no limit on martial law. What was the limit in 1971? What was the term? How long can a president be on years be re-elected? What was in 1971?
So if you're asking about when it comes to the president's election, in 1935 we had a 4-year term for the president, and he or she can be re-elected for another term. So that's a total of 8 years. So there was a constitutional dilemma during the Second World War, because when the Philippine government led by President Quezon went into exile in the United States, and then the 8-year term for the president is coming to a close. They had a dilemma, they had a conundrum. If President Quezon can still continue as president after 1943, because he was elected, if we remember, in 1935. So it took a move from America to extend Quezon's term. But of course, we know that he died before the war ended, and he was succeeded by Vice President Osmeña. When it comes to the 1971 Constitution, we gave the president a 6-year term. So that is also the origin of we also got the 6-year term that is also carried over in 1987. But the difference is, with 1987, we do not have re-election for the president, whereas in 1971 he can be re-elected, or he or she can be re-elected, and of course that would mean a total of 12 years.
Re-elected only once. You cannot be re-elected unlimited times.
No.
So a total of 12 years.
Yes.
So if that's the case, Marcos Sr. was re-elected, and he could be re-elected for 12 more years. He was first elected what year? 1965.
But that was under the 1935 Constitution,
which is only under 4 years. So that means by 1973 he will be up for re-election. He cannot be re-elected anymore.
No.
So is that the reason why the 1971 Constitution changed it to 6 years? So does that mean, if it was changed in 1971, Marcos is now subject to 1971 and he can be re-elected or extend his term?
we saw that in the 1981 election when Marcos ran for an unprecedented third term. So
And
he
that
won
was
that.
that was constitutionally all right with the 1971.
That was enforced. Yes.
Because if it was 1971, 6 years times 2 is 12. He was elected in 1965, so that means he was his term for two terms. Okay, should have been over by 1977.
Yes, but the 1935 Constitution was not in effect by then.
So he's working on a different term now. With a new
Yes.
constitution, everything is a clean, a blank slate, and he could start the 12 years. Is that what you're saying?
In effect, yes, because that was what was decided in the ratification cases.
So there's no overlap. What you're saying is that because the 1971 Constitution had new term legislated into it, okay, or written into it, now Marcos has a blank slate since on 1971 to start his 12-year, the possibility of 2 re-elections.
That is also why he was able to run in 1986, although the Constitution would have mandated it in the next year, the following year, 1987.
Okay, in the 1987. By that time, he was exiled to the United States. Okay. Now, what are the provisions in the 1987 Constitution to avoid? You said the time period for martial law is limited to 60 days. What other provisions in the 1987 Constitution protects democracy in the Philippines versus 1971?
On what aspect are you
Politically, freedom of speech, okay, politically wise, as you said, we touch on the number of elections, the length of term a president can be, okay, the powers that are bestowed to him, okay.
When it comes to the president, there's not much that has changed, with the exception of the term limit of having only one term. When we're comparing 1971 and 1987, we have to take in mind that the 1987 Constitution was not formed by a convention elected delegates, but with a commission that was formed by the administration, by the Aquino administration.
Aquino.
Yes. Whereas in 1971, as in 1935 as well, it was a convention. It was a constitutional convention composed of elected delegates. So that is also one difference there when we compare on how they were crafted, and of course with the provisions. That is the major change when it comes to the president, that we have a term limit to the president, whereas for the vice president, for instance, the re-election is retained.
Why was that?
Well, for one, we elect our president and vice president separately. So, unlike in the United States, where they had to be in one party, in one ticket, and you elect them both.
But why is the vice president allowed so many re-election, whereas the president's not? What was the rationale behind that?
If we look at our political history, the vice president does not function as like the president. No, it may sound pejorative, but political scientists would like to say that in the Philippines, the vice president is a reserve for the president. So when it comes to in his absence, or if he or she is incapacitated or unable to carry on with his duties, That is the constitutional role of the vice president. Otherwise, if the vice president does not have a cabinet portfolio, he or she does not have much to do when it comes to the functions of the Philippine government. Uh, what we began to elect the vice president and the president separately, actually, since since the 20th century. And the first time that we elected a president and vice president from different parties would be in 1957. That was also the first time that the president and the vice president did not win by a majority but by plurality. So we have now a president and a vice president that does not come from the same ticket. And what happened back then that was if we recall, that was President Garcia and then Vice President Macapagal. They came from different parties, and what we saw was Vice President Macapagal was not given the traditional post of secretary, but also he was not given a cabinet portfolio at all. So that was a time when we saw that when the president and the vice president come from different parties, we see how the vice president actually functions based on our prevailing laws.
But this time, they come from the same party. President
Yes.
Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and Vice President Sara Duterte.
Yes, they come from the same coalition, actually.
Coalition, not party. What's the difference?
In the 1987 Constitution allowed for multiple parties to run. No, it was unlike back then, when although it was not explicitly given in the Constitution, but we had a two-party system that was between the liberals and the nationalistas. Now we have multiple parties. We have many parties that we had not seen a presidential election that boiled down to two major candidates since 1986. So that is one reason why our leaders today would like to form coalitions with other parties.
So Sara Duterte and President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. belong to different parties, but they did a coalition in order to get the votes.
Yes.
Yes. So we're talking about President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. or Bongbong Marcos, as he is popularly known. And of course, we all know that his father was also the president, Ferdinand Marcos Sr. Based on what you've seen so far, I think this is the second year of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Am I correct? Okay.
Yes.
How do you see his policies, his overall presidency and leadership? How do you see it compared to his father, Ferdinand Marcos Sr.?
I think I think part of how they manage the nation is affected by the global conditions at the time, because for instance, back then, if we look at the administration of Marcos Sr., the conditions back then was the Cold War, and we also see a drive towards centralization. We also see a drive towards nationalization that is not unique to the Philippines, but can be also seen in other countries back then, say the Asian tigers, Korea, Singapore, and then now we see economic liberalization. We see a drive towards opening up and conducting free trade across nations. And so, if we look at the macroeconomic policies of the two, of father and son, we can say that it is not much about it is not much about how they deal with it as president, but how they respond to the prevailing circumstances. Because, for instance, if we look at how Marcos Jr. manages our economy, we can say that if we base on available reports, that he is managing our recovery quite well, and we are referring to the recovery from the pandemic, when almost every nation in the world experienced a downturn.
And with Ferdinand Marcos Sr.?
With Ferdinand Marcos Sr., he did not have to deal with a global pandemic, but he had to deal with an energy crisis. So that is also part of the reason why we had to centralize our functions, and we had to enter into government to government exchanges, which is more secure back then when it comes to the Philippines.
What do you mean government exchanges? What are you referring to?
I am referring back then to when we nationalized our energy management. We centralized our energy management. It was back, if we remember, it was back then when we had our first department or Ministry of Energy. So that was actually more of a response to the prevailing energy crisis that is experienced not only in the Philippines but also around the world, also in the United States as well.
All right. So, the 1986 People Power Revolution was something that amazed the nation as well as the world. With Bongbong Marcos re-elected, and the 1986 Power Revolution was actually the ouster of his father. Has the People Power Revolution, has it dissipated in many ways, whatever effect it has? Was it just a blot, a simple blot in our Philippine history? What is the impact now? Nothing?
The People Power Revolution is also... wait. Okay. The People Power Revolution is also a sign of its times. There were peaceful demonstrations from around the world during that time. For instance, you can say the Carnation Revolution in Portugal, and then the subsequent demonstrations in Europe.
The fall of the Berlin Wall.
Yes. Yes. So when we look at the historical context, the Philippines is we can say attuned to the times back then. But now we are also experiencing a different geopolitical context. For instance, we can say that Marcos Jr. is managing the country counter to the expectations of him during the 2022 elections.
What are those?
Because there there are conjectures that Marcos Jr. was building on Marcos Sr.'s image as a Marcos Sr.'s image when he ruled the country. So that included, for instance, the drive towards centralization and the drive towards nationalization. But what we see in Marcos Jr. today is more of a macroeconomic trend that is carried over 2 decades, and he is also continuing now. For instance, we can look at how the Marcos administration continued the tax reform agenda that has been ongoing since, say, in the past 2 decades.
I see. Arius, what, given, as you said, if we do not look back, history might be, we might have parallelisms in the future. Okay. How do you see the history of the Philippines? Do you, everything's tentative? I'm not asking you to look at the crystal ball, but what's your feeling on how we're progressing within the national stage and within the international stage?
I think the Philippines has a very bright prospect when it comes to historical development. If we take, for example, the People Power Revolution, it is more of a revolution that highly involved the media, the power of the media. It involved the power of symbols, and that we see today actually. That we see more today actually when we talk about, for example, culture and soft power. And so that is why the Philippines experiencing those events in their history, and also having those experiences, carrying them moving forward. I think that we as Filipinos have a great chance to move forward as a nation, as a better nation.
But how do we deal with political dynasties if the same family group are ruling the Philippines not only at the national level, but on a municipal or provincial level?
I think it's more on how we work as a system. Because, for instance, you can look at the United States and see that they also have dynasties. And actually, we have more stringent term limits in the Philippines as compared to America. So if we are only comparing personalities, I don't think we should be boiled down on personalities as much as we should be concerned about how we can improve our system, how we can improve our civil service, for instance, or how we can improve how our government functions operate, and so on and so forth.
Well, what about corruption? There is a journalist who used to work in the Philippines, became a communications person for one of the political leaders there, and decided to immigrate to Canada. And when she was interviewed a few months ago, she mentioned the fact that having worked as a journalist and then working for the government, she really saw how systemic corruption is in the Philippines. Okay, how do we make sure that the funding, the budget, as you said, that goes to 40% goes to FGUs, indeed goes down to benefit the people and not the leaders?
I would not like to think that Filipinos are naturally inclined to corruption, because if you look at our history, if we look at our pre-colonial or even our colonial past, we can see Filipinos with integrity. We can see Filipinos who exhibit honesty and accountability when it comes to their exchanges or their dealings with other people. And also, we can see that how Filipinos are highly relational people because, for instance, we can see as evidence our language, the Filipino languages, the Philippine languages, for instance, Tagalog, have so many conjugations that you may think that in just one word you can have as many combinations as you can think of, and then they are referring to different people moving as you go along the way. So I think when it comes to how Filipinos build relationships, that is also part of our trademark as Filipinos. We are not, more on how we are hospitable, or how we look at how we treat other people well, and also when we look at, for instance, the issue of corruption, and we see that when we see that being involved in corrupt practices does not benefit other people, I think we can appeal more on our traits as a people historically, and see that perhaps in this modern day and age, that is one of the key traits or key values that we may want to emulate as we go.
What's your advice to people when it comes to electing their leaders? We go back to the original, the first topic that we had, Pangulo regime, the desire to elect people who are strong in reputation and in the way they proclaim and present themselves to people. Strong men. We want kings and queens, just like in the Bible when the people said, we wanted a king. Okay. And God said, okay, you want a king? I'll give you a king. And unfortunately, in some cases, the king turns out to be the bad choice. How should we elect political leaders? What traits should we consider? And when should we say no to money being passed to us to vote for someone?
I think when it comes to leadership, we can look at the traits of a leader that may be appealing to us. But of course, feelings are temporal. They come and go. But what perhaps we would like to see from our leadership, from people who administer us, is the ability, the capability to bring results. Because that is not only for the Philippines, but also for anywhere in the world. They would like their leaders to lead them, and leaders cannot function well without their followers, without those who would be willing to submit to their leadership and work together. So actually, it's more of a two-way street, no? If we would like to change the world, then we have to first change ourselves, and also how we see or how we look at leaders, because our leaders are not one-shot panaceas to our problems. They help us, but also we also help them. It's a relationship that we Filipinos should understand, I believe.
Well said. Thank you very much, Arius, Raposas,
Thank you
for informing us and elucidating on Philippine history and what we need to gaze at, to review, to be reminded of, looking at history so that we can avoid unpleasant parallelisms in the future. Maraming salamat, Arius.
Maraming salamat dito.
Arius Raposas, we were just talking to him. He's a Philippine historian, okay, and well known for his political, historical blogs, rather. What's your blog again, Arius?
It's called the Filipino Historian.
Yes. Thank you. You just have to search that online. Thank you. And as you very well said, Arius, okay, we need to start by changing ourselves, okay, in order to change the world.
If we could see through the eyes of a child, life would be simple again. We should be learning wrong isn't right. Time to come out of the dark and into the light. You know that if you're waiting for the world to change, it's gotta come from the heart, 'cause that's where it starts. If the world is ever gonna change, it's gotta come from within. Let's begin, 'cause what we need is a change. Oh yeah. You know it doesn't matter who you are. We've all got so much to lose. Spread the word, it's time to make a move. Don't hide your head in the sand. Reach out and take someone's hand. You know that if you're waiting for the world to change, it's gotta come from the heart, 'cause that's where it starts. And if the world is ever gonna change, it's gotta come from within, and that's where it begins. What will it take? The truth is at stake. I've been losing trust. It's lost in the dust. And there'll come a day we'll find a way. And I heard someone say, all you need is listen, know that if you're waiting for the world to change, it's gotta come from the heart, 'cause that's where it starts. And if the world is ever gonna change, it's gotta come from within, that's where it begins. If you're waiting for the world to change, you better search your heart, 'cause that's where it starts. If the world is ever gonna change, it's gotta come from within. Let's begin. It's what we need is a change. Wow, people, it's time for a change in our world. Look in the eyes of a child, let him see you smile. Time for a change. No more fears, no more children's tears. Time for a change.
You're listening to the Filipino edition, and we will be right back.
Looking to upgrade your current ride? Don't want the hassle of wait lists? I'm Jeevan Bath, General Manager at Suki Bath Auto Group. Our family has been in the auto industry for over 44 years, making every customer feel like they're part of the family. Enjoy affordable bi-weekly payments on all our models. Family owned and operated with over 300 vehicles in stock. Visit SukiBathAutoGroup.com today. That's SUKHI BathAutoGroup.com. Putting you first keeps us ahead.
You're listening to the Filipino edition. I'm your host, Joseph Lopez. As our guest, historian Arius Raposas said, if we would like to change the world, we have to change ourselves first.
If we could see through the eyes of a child, life would be simple again. We should be loved